I'd now like to call the member for Monero to give her inaugural address.
And the snowy river riders on the mountains make their home, where the river runs those giant hills between. Banjo Patterson's bush hero, fearlessly racing down the mountain in pursuit of the colt that got away, first entered public consciousness in 1890. More than 130 years on, the man from Snowy River and the place with which he's so closely associated, Monero, continue to capture the wider imagination, and both have long earned their place in the annals of Australian history. Well before and ever after, the deep connection of our locale's ancient peoples can be witnessed in some of the most significant traditional sites in our great nation, which coexist within the broader bounds of Monero. In respecting the heritage of the oldest continuing culture in the world, so too was it from the first languages that the place name Monero ultimately emerged. Altered many times, Monera, Monaroo, Manaroo, and more, before its final incarnation. The meaning is still debated, but it's thought to embody the essence of that diverse landscape for which it's recognised. Then there's that tricky pronunciation. It's certainly held that Holden's original 1967 coupe was named for the area, a member of the company's design team passing through Cooma, apparently spotting it on a council sign. Proving he wasn't a local, the popular model was dubbed a Monaro rather than Monero, and every resident will expect you to know the difference. Yet another fascinating thread woven into the cultural fabric of this special place, first happened upon by the land's newest arrivals almost precisely 2 centuries ago, as they began to venture south of Sydney. In a 1976 publication marking the 150th anniversary of settlement in the southeastern corner of the colony of New South Wales, Mrs. Laurie Neal wrote of the characters with whom we can feel an emotional link, whether they be the young shepherds, the lonely stockmen, the struggling farmers, the hopeful diggers, the hardy merchants, or the quiet engineers. From our colonial past to the progress we witnessed from the turn of the 20th century, to our embrace of modern multicultural Australia in our ongoing national evolution, each of these elements of who we are has and continues to play an important part in shaping our destiny. With all of that in mind, how delighted I am to have called this region home for more than 3 decades. And beyond that, the pride I feel must be visibly radiating from me in being elected to serve as the parliamentary representative of this extraordinary electorate. What an incredible thing it is to stand here in this most historic of establishments, speaking of a famed poem and the chance to wax lyrical on a location unique in the length and breadth of our sunburnt country. From Nerriga and Araluen at its top, through Braidwood, Queanbeyan, and the many satellites in their orbits, including Bungendore and Captain's Flat. Travelling through its heart along the primary thoroughfare created in 1938, marked on maps as the Monero Highway 20 years later, to Cooma and beyond. Niminabel, Bombala, Jindabyne, Adaminaby, Delegate, where it marks the waypoint with the Victorian border. From the rolling plains to the foothills leading onto the slopes of the Snowies, our portion of the Australian Alps, the pinnacle of which is the awe-inspiring Mount Kosciuszko, or, closer to its native Polish, Kosciuszko. I'm also not going to overlook Dalgety. In the early 1900s, one of the top contenders in the battle to become the capital city of a newly federated nation, pipped at the post to see Canberra instead landed in Queanbeyan's backyard. All of the other smaller villages and hamlets too, from Breadbow to Majors Creek, nestled within the more than 20,000 square kilometres of Monero's boundaries. A political seat since the first sitting of this very Parliament in 1856, and served by 24 different members over the course of that time. It's only recently come to my attention that one of them has a statue almost directly in front of this great house, and for whom Sydney's civic heart, Martin Place, was named. Sir James Martin, as his monument attests, was a champion of self-reliance and public education, and also the 4th MP for Monero in 1864. He subsequently served as Premier 3 times before being appointed Chief Justice of New South Wales. Dare I say, that's quite a record of public achievement to be following on from. As the 25th member for Monero, not for a moment lost on me is the historic import and the equally great privilege of being the first woman to ever represent the electorate in more than 165 years of its European story. Not the reason why I'm here, but a significant and poignant realisation nonetheless. I don't deny I'm in awe of actually standing where I am today, and the last 5 months have been quite the ride for me also, and for those on this journey with me. I'm a mum, a wife, a daughter, sister and aunt, and a friend. I've been a journalist, a small business owner, an author, a community champion, and you probably won't be too surprised to learn, an avid historian. My interest in politics began early, and while it had variously crossed my radar in the course of an otherwise diverse life path, finding myself here now is somewhat unexpected. In saying that, to channel musical icon Julie Andrews as she climbed every mountain in search of her dream, when a door closes, somewhere a window opens. While not raised in Monero, it turned out I had quite a long-standing connection. My grandparents had lived there during the 1950s, my pop a shearer on the historic property Carwoola between Queanbeyan and Captain's Flat. I was actually born and grew up in Griffith, New South Wales, in the heart of the Riverina. It's a terrific, diverse regional city, and I have many friends and family still there. My mum was a trainee nurse when she met my father, a truck driver. Both were very young when I arrived, to be followed by a sister and brother. It was a tough childhood. There wasn't much money, nor a great deal of household harmony, and we had to deal with a lot. As difficult as some of my early life experiences were, they produced in me characteristics I wouldn't change: resilience, forthrightness, empathy, and a rather pronounced streak of determination, some might say occasionally stubborn. Loyal too, and when I give you my word, you can be assured I'll back it. What I won't do, though, is promise the world and deliver a globe, personally or professionally. Growing up, we spent much time with our grandparents at their small property at Hay, where it backs onto the Murrumbidgee. There I did what country kids do. I swam and fished in that river, rode horses and motorbikes, drove the tractor around the paddocks. But I also saw the real job, the successes, the hardships, the dedication of those living, working, running farms and small businesses, and raising families in regional and rural Australia. In my teenage years, much talk over the dinner table revolved around interest rates approaching 18%, as the country hurtled towards what Paul Keating told us was the recession we had to have. I experienced firsthand the almost crippling effects on my wider family alone. Our local, state and federal members of that period were well known to us and highly regarded generally. Tim Fisher, Noel Hicks, Jim Small, Adrian Cruikshank, Nationals all. That grassroots nature of genuine local politics, representatives who had similarly lived and worked in their communities, who knew their communities and what mattered to them, that resonated for me then and now. Some of my early interest in journalism came from my pop's seemingly inexhaustible archive of the Weekly Times, known for more than 150 years as the Bible of the Bush for good reason. While I also had an interest in law, the more creative side of me prevailed. A communications degree at the University of Canberra followed, the first in my wider family to ever go to uni. Moving 4 hours from home to Queanbeyan, more or less because it reminded me of the country town that I'd just left. And for me, Canberra was still a big city. A career starting out on the Tumut and Adelong Times, a fabulous all-round experience. I was quite keen on the business world too, and back in Queanbeyan, I launched a local entertainment magazine when I was still in my early 20s, $100 in the bank and no financial backing. I sold that successful business 6 years later. I'd returned to my first passion, media and communications, as well as earning something of a reputation as a regional historian during my husband Tim's 17 years in local government. This would include his 13 years as Mayor of Queanbeyan and Queanbeyan-Palorang from 2008 until his decision last year that almost 2 decades of service to the community in that guise was accomplishment enough. Thanks to that time, I'm not a complete novice when it comes to elections, and I ran Tim's 4 successful campaigns. By-elections, though, I can now fully attest, are such unusual beasts, and Monero hasn't had one since 1918. While in some ways the feeling is a little like being the colloquial 12th man, awaiting a generally unexpected and highly visible late entrance to the field of play, I also had the privilege to experience great teamwork. Even prior to putting myself forward, I've been encouraged, backed and supported, not only by my friends and family, but also the Nationals family. From our Monero branch, state team and executive, our leaders, ministers, MPs, members and supporters, so many rallied behind me and for me from the outset. So too, others who are part of this coalition government. Federal colleagues also, who came out to stand beside me. In stepping up to demonstrate that your faith and confidence in me is deserved by working as hard as I could every single day over the course of a long campaign, so will I continue to work just as hard for you, for my electorate and our great state, New South Wales. I am a team player. One of the reasons I've enjoyed team sports my entire life, and a shout out here to some of my previous and current ones, Queanbeyan Bears Softball Club, Queanbeyan City Football Club and Monero Panthers FC, is because I believe it reveals much about character. Playing your part to the absolute best of your ability and encouraging others to do the same. Being reliable and dedicated, and never giving up until the final siren sounds. One of the most meaningful compliments I received throughout my election campaign was from a local who I've played against rather than with. Her message to me: if you're as hard-working and tenacious standing up for the community as you are on the soccer pitch, Monero will do well. As I have in all aspects of my life, I promise to be just as hard-working and tenacious in standing up for my communities in this role. Most put themselves forward for public service such as this on the basis they want to make a difference. For me, it's also about doing things differently, affecting change not just for the sake of it, but because it's necessary. My passion for exploring and animating the past also fuels my forward thinking. From a political perspective, this isn't only a year's time or the 4 years after that, but, as the old saying goes, looking to plant trees under the shade of which I will never sit. We can proudly boast as our own some of the greatest examples of this we've ever witnessed: the groundbreaking Snowy Hydro and now Snowy 2.0. I'm committed to seeing the continued development of the Special Activation Precinct at Jindabyne, a 40-year vision for the transformation of a gateway to one of the most popular tourist destinations in the country. The critical key that opens so many doors: education. To be able to bring to fruition the long aspired for new and upgraded schools for Monero is something I am determined to see happen. not because of an electoral cycle, but because I know how long my communities have been calling for these vital pieces of infrastructure and services in our region. And they are so much more than just infrastructure. Schools are the very hearts of our communities, shaping both the future of our young people as well as the places we call home. To continue to positively shape them, we need to be able to educate our own, train our own, provide for our own, and keep our own. This is how our communities continue to thrive. Looking after our most vulnerable is another area of great personal importance to me. Over the last few decades, my involvements have included 7 years as President of Meals on Wheels in Queanbeyan, Chair of Queanbeyan Headspace and local education facilities, fundraising endeavours for our local health services, as well as supporting organisations involved with victims of domestic violence and the homeless. How we care for those in need is one of the great testaments to who we are. This includes our elders, ensuring that those who have given so much of themselves know they continue to be valued members of our communities and are afforded the dignity and respect they've earned. As everyone knows, when it comes to aged care and healthcare, there are major challenges, and it's even harder in our smaller regional and rural areas. However, that's when it becomes even more critical to ensure they are not overlooked. This is a situation I'm very saddened to say we are currently facing down in Bombala at a residential aged care facility, Warner, originally brought into being through the hard work and dedication of the town's residents. While the provision of such services is the purview of the federal government, ultimately, it's about us all. What's required is cooperation and collaboration across levels, and I'll do all I can to support the formulation and implementation of long-term sustainable solutions in this regard. The more commonplace issues too, be this the state of our roads which have taken such a beating, to biosecurity, from wild dogs to invasive weeds and the damage they inflict on what's one of the most significant agricultural and grazing regions in the country. Not necessarily headline-grabbing stuff, but everyday matters that matter to everyday lives, and so also matter to me. Over the last few years in Monero, we've dealt with most of what nature can throw at us. And of course, on top of 2 years of incredible hardship none of us could have imagined, despite the lessons that should have been better learned from history and the influenza pandemic of 1918-1919. More than a century later, I've had one tired and frustrated young person, in talking about the impact of COVID on themselves, their friends and family, describe it to me as a time of non-life. With that phrase ringing in my ears, my focus now and into the future is our continued recovery, not only economically, but also psychologically. Backing small business, ensuring secure work and job opportunities, and assisting in the provision of homes people can afford to live in, particularly those for whom this is an ongoing struggle. Caring for our environment too. Indeed, continuing to be at the forefront in this, in the example this government is setting, offering attainable and sustainable solutions, something our farmers and land managers in particular are attuned to more than most. And in light of everything we've faced, locally, as a state, and nationally, with the heartbreak and devastation of the last month alone uppermost in our minds, and acknowledging the incredible assistance already provided in this respect, how we continue to further improve our capacity to anticipate and deal with disasters, both natural and man-made. In 1956, the then Senator John F. Kennedy wrote in a book, Profiles in Courage, "There are few, if any, issues where all the truth and all the right and all the angels are on one side. Political compromise," he went on, "is the fine art of conciliating, balancing, and interpreting the forces and factions of public opinion, an art essential to keeping our nation united and enabling our government to function." I could not agree more. No one really gets by in life without the support and care, and sometimes the prodding, of others. I have so many who have helped me on my path that sees me here before you today. Supporters, friends, new and old. How I would like to individually name every one of you, but that would possibly lead to my first ejection from this illustrious chamber. However, please know that all of you are in my mind and my heart. Those I'll talk of briefly include the former member for Monero and Deputy Premier John Barilaro. Monero is not a safe seat, and John's accomplishments over more than a decade were remarkable. He delivered much for the electorate, precisely as his role as its representative and primary advocate demands. I now look forward to building on this and forging a new road forward. I wish John well for his future and thank him for his confidence in me to continue to advance Monero's cause. I also thank for being here today the Honourable Gary Nan, AO, Federal Member for Eden Monero from 1996 to 2007 and a long-time family friend. So do I thank New South Wales National State Director Joe Lundy, Chair Andrew Fraser and all in the head office team. To my dedicated campaign team, Angus Webber, Rowan Carter, backed up by Alicia and Ashley and supported by George Lemon. Rowan suggested we pulled off what would normally equate to a year-long campaign in just 4 months, and I appreciate all of your efforts in achieving what we did. So am I grateful to our Monero branch members, including some of the newest that I've had the pleasure to introduce. To the ministers who travelled far and wide with me in the course of the campaign, Sam Farraway, Dougal Saunders, Kevin Anderson and Sarah Mitchell, who could not have given me more support with our local schools. I'm so looking forward to working more closely with you all, as well as the rest of our team. And of course, our deputy leader, the indomitable Bronnie Taylor, who's been such a support for me throughout it all. Dunk Taylor too, for putting up with us fretting around the Taylor kitchen at all hours. Thank you to you both, perhaps most of all for your friendship. I'd also like to mention Sue Litchfield of Cooma. I'm sure Sue won't mind me revealing she's recently turned 80 and she remains a local powerhouse and the epitome of dedicated women throughout regional and rural Australia. I was so pleased that one of my first official duties was to nominate and present Sue as our 2022 Monero Woman of the Year. To those who are essentially family to us and rallied as my own supporter army, including Brent and Kat Hunter, here today with baby Eliza, Trudy and Shane Taylor, the Brays and Biscottis and Nat Harper. A heartfelt thanks to you all. Also to members of our clans on both sides. Also my sister Michelle and her Albury-based family, my brother Damon and my mum Lorraine in Queensland. As I've mentioned, it wasn't an easy road for us when we were kids, but my mum worked hard to keep a roof over our head, to make sure we had the opportunities of an education, and who has always believed in us unequivocally. Thanks, Mum, for all you did and the sacrifices I know you made. I'd also beg your indulgence to note here today my grandma Shirley. I'm sad to say she died just a few weeks before the by-election, almost 90, still living on the family property on the Hay Plain. A hard-working and gracious woman, I'm so pleased I at least had the chance to let her know that I'd put myself forward for this great challenge. Her words to me, I've always had faith in you. Finally then, to three of the finest people I know, beginning with our sons, Nick and Alex. I am a little bit biased, but they are amazing young men, and I'd think so even if I didn't have the privilege of being their mum. I'm so proud of you both for who you are. And of course, Tim Overall, always in my corner, whatever I've put my mind to over our 25 years of marriage, a milestone just passed on the 1st of this month, the same date they officially declared the poll. Again, biased I may be, but there's plenty who agree that Tim is truly a top bloke and an accomplished one too, not least for having delivered a transformative and well-received vision for the Queanbeyan-Palorang area of Monero. Thank you, Tim, for agreeing to marry me when I asked you. for encouraging me to be who I am, and for being by my side through it all. The Deputy Premier and currently Acting Premier and our New South Wales Nationals leader, the Honourable Paul Toole, to whom I also owe much thanks, recently described me as someone intensely passionate about and a champion for my communities. I truly love the place I've called home for more than 30 years, where I've worked, run businesses, raised a family, and been involved in my community in many ways. This now is all about Monero and my fellow residents. My role is to listen, engage, hear, and progress their hopes and aspirations for where we live. That doesn't mean I'll always be able to please everyone all the time, but they can have confidence that I'll stand up for them and fight as hard as I possibly can to ensure their voices are heard. Thank you then for this greatest of honours, to be the elected representative of our magnificent Monero. I'll do everything in my power to deliver what's wanted and needed as we step forward into the future together. Thank you.